Okay, one of the big things in this week's parasha is the manna, the mun that the Jews ate for 40 years in the desert. And it was a spectacular food, as we know, and the Torah tells us what a spectacular food it was. So let's just quickly collate what are the special elements of the mun that made it so unique as food goes.
It's like crystallized.
So it looked like crystals. That's how the Torah describes it. It looked like crystals. Okay, what else?
It could taste like anything.
It could taste like anything that you could imagine, with a few exceptions. Right? Rashi points out that cucumbers, melons, garlics, things that were not good for feeding mothers. But outside of that, it could taste like anything. What else?
It absorbed into the body. You would never have
It was completely absorbed into the body. There was no waste matter.
It was consistent.
There we go. That's what we're going to be talking about today. It was consistent. Now, of course, if I use the word consistency, you might think that that's the texture of the food. But the fact is, it was consistent. So let's unpack that. What was consistent about it?
the time of that will arrive.
Correct? The delivery was always at exactly the same time,
It would also expire.
right? It would expire, so if you didn't eat it that day.
One portion
And
per
there's
day.
the thing. You
Except
only
for-
could get one portion, except for Friday. Okay? You only could get one portion. What happens if you collected more than your portion?
Frotis.
No, that's only if you kept it till the next day. Only if you kept it till the next day, then it went rancid. But if you collected more mun than you were allocated, what would happen? When you got home, you'd check, and the portion would be that standard portion.
Okay.
And what would happen if you collected, for whatever reason, less than what you were supposed to?
You'd
Same.
still have
Same
to
concept. You get home, and, well, look at that. It's the same portion. So one of the big aspects of the mun is the consistency of the portion. No matter what, no matter who, everybody gets the same amount of mun. Okay? So my question is, how much was that portion? Now we're going to test who's really been studying, right? How much is the portion that every person got? Okay?
Exactly.
People don't really know. All right, so let's have a look. Throughout the whole section of the mun, the whole description, the Torah consistently uses one word as the measure, and that measure is called an omer, similar to the counting of the omer, which relates to an offering that was brought in the Beis Hamikdash that was made from an omer of barley. It's a measurement. It's a measurement, an omer. And that's what it says, that anybody who collected more did not get more than an omer, and anybody who collected less did not get less than an omer. Okay?
So how much is an omer?
Ah, there we go.
I think it's more related to the satiation point. When somebody
Okay.
doesn't need it anymore.
Good.
Everybody had their
Good,
enough
good, good,
breaking
good.
point.
Okay? So hold that thought. That's a very important point. So the question is, how much is an omer? And then we're going to have to unpack what an omer is. Now, anybody who's familiar with how you read the Torah, how you lane, so you'll know that the end of a section ends with a different note. That's how you know it's the end of an aliyah. So happens that the line that tells us how much an omer is has that note. Why? Because it's the end of the section. So the very last thing we're told about the mun is ve'ha omer, the measure of an omer, asiris ha'efa hu, is 1/10 of another measure of dry goods, which is called an ephah. So they got 10% of an ephah. That's an omer. If you look at Rashi, Rashi goes through a whole calculation of exactly what that translates into, and he essentially relates it to a portion of eggs. So it works out to 43 and a bit eggs. That's the portion. That's the portion of an ephah. Right, and then you work out what an omer is. Okay. So I have a simple question. Not my own question, but there's a very simple question on this section. The Rebbe asks this question: if you were telling a story, at which point, if the story is very much about portions, at which point would you tell us what the portion is? In other words,
At the beginning.
to start, right? That's the most logical place to put it, right at the beginning. This is going to be a story of, and it's such, you've pointed it out, the consistency is such a big part of the story. The fact that you had to know how much you were allowed to collect, or how much you were going to land up with regardless of what you collected, or how much you needed to collect on a Friday in order to accommodate the fact that you'd have food for Shabbos. To work all of that out, surely you should tell me up front how much that is. It does seem a bit strange that we only get that information at the end of the whole story. Now, just to appreciate what the end of the story means, before this line that says that 1 omer equals 1/10 of an ephah, before this line, the Torah tells us that the Jewish people ate the man for 40 years in the desert. In other words, logically, if you're telling the story, this is kind of how it should go. The Jews had an issue. They were worried about food because the supplies they'd taken out of Egypt were starting to run out. So they complained, as the Jewish community does. And in response to their complaint, Hashem says, I'm going to provide you with this incredible supernatural food. It's called the man. Actually, they call it the man. The Torah tells us they call it man because they don't know what it is. And man is actually an expression of a question, like, what is this? But I'm going to supply you with this incredible food. And there are going to be rules around this food. The rules are that there'll be no man on Shabbos morning, so don't even bother going out to collect. Therefore, you should collect double on Friday. Nobody's getting more, nobody's getting less. How much is the more or less that you're not getting? It's called an omer. Oh, tell me now what an omer is. You've introduced the portion. You're telling me that we're getting an omer. This would be the perfect place to tell me what an omer is, because let's be honest, we didn't know what an omer was. And the likelihood is the Jews at the time didn't yet necessarily know what an omer was. And anybody who's reading the Torah in today's world, where we don't measure with those measurements, we don't know what an omer is. So now that you've reached the point in the story where you're describing how much man everybody's getting, now's your opportunity to tell us what an omer is. Doesn't do that. Tells us all the other details. Tells us about the fact that you had to go out, you had to collect it, you had to grind it in order to turn it into man. Tells us a story that there were people who didn't listen and they put out man the next day, and it when it went off. A lot of information. Tells us a lot of information. Then it tells us that they ate the man for 40 years, which essentially means by the end of that comment, in our heads, we're 40 years later. Because when you get told that they ate the man for 40 years, and the Torah says clearly, Ad boyom el eretz neishaves, until they arrived in a settled land. So that tells you that they ate the man until they were in Israel. And by the way, there's no question that they ate man in Israel as well. The question is just for how long. So one view just says it was the first few days that they were in Israel till they found other food sources. But there's another opinion that says they ate the man for 14 years in Israel, because they needed to divide the land, and before that, they needed to conquer the people who lived in the land. So during that entire period, according to one opinion, they still had the man. That means, by the time you've reached this point of the story, we're getting the overview, the history of the man. You are decades later. It's a strange place to say, oh, and by the way, the measure of the man is an omer, i.e., 1/10 of an ephah. It really seems like the most inappropriate place to stick that information. Doesn't seem to fit. So we're going to have to understand why it is that there's a story of the man. In the story of the man, we keep referencing the word omer, and then there is the detail of the omer, which only comes right at the end. Now, some of the commentaries will say, well, that's exactly the point, because there are two things happening over here. One thing that's happening is the story. Another thing that's happening is the technical details. So you've got the story of when the man began, how people reacted to it, the fact that there was just a single measure no matter who you were. That's the story. And then you have the technical details, like almost the part that you throw out as soon as you open the box. That starts giving you the specifications, the dimensions, or the contraindications, or whatever it is. That's the part nobody's really interested in, so it gets stuck all the way at the end. That's what some of the commentaries want to suggest. But the truth is, you could use that argument in the exact reverse. You could use that argument to say, let's provide the technical details right at the beginning before we get into the story. So we'll tell you there's going to be man. We'll tell you the money is going to be an oimer. We'll tell you what an oimer is, and now we'll tell you the story. And that would be just as plausible. So that doesn't really give us a reason why the technical detail of what the volume of an oimer is belongs after the entire story, and even implying not only after the story, but after the entire journey of the man. Only now does it become relevant. It's almost as if the Torah is telling us the only time you need to know this measurement is when you get to Israel. Because the preceding pasuk said they ate the man for 40 years until they got to their settlement, to their homeland. So it sounds almost as if you don't need to know the size of the omer until you get to Israel. Now that's strange, because you're going to eat this thing for 40 years and you don't need to know the size. That doesn't seem to sit well. So we've got to try and unpack over here what's going on. What is the message? And in order to do that, let's go back to Jeff's point about what is an omer. Again, I'm not saying now the size of an omer. What's the intention of an omer? What's the purpose of the omer? So let's say that you've got a family. And in that family, you have 2 parents, and we'll just make it simple, 6 kids. Why did I say 6 kids? Because that was the bracha the Jews had in Egypt, right? That they had children in batches of 6. So he has a family, 2 adults, 6 kids. They've just left Egypt. The mother is a petite, typical woman. The father has got an obesity issue and is 6'5". They've got a toddler he doesn't have an obesity issue. It's just 6.5. They've got a toddler who's a year old. So are they each eating 1 omer of man a day? The big, oversized dad, the regular mom, and the little toddler, not to mention the other 5 kids, are they all eating the same amount of man every day? What do you think? Based on the storyline.
Was it per person or per family?
No, it was
No,
per
omer, it
person.
says very specifically was per person. And just to make this more fun, the Torah says that it's omer, that's the amount that you get. And then it says, ish lefi achloi, each person according to their eating, implying their eating habits or their eating needs.
Obviously,
So what is an omer? Is an omer one size fits all?
it's a portion that changes sizes.
Okay, so that's what Jeff was saying, right? That omer relates to your satiation point. So if you're the big guy, your omer needs to be a bigger omer, and if you're the little toddler, your omer needs to be a smaller omer. That would be the logical thing to argue, right? Except the Torah says, Hamarbeh loy hoisif, that if a person took extra man, it did not land up being more than an omer. Va'amamit loy hechsir, and a person who took less of that man, it landed up being no less than an omer, meaning the portion of man adjusted itself to a size called an omer. That sounds like it's a standard size for everybody. Everybody's getting the same omer. Now, if that's the case, that surely sounds incredibly strange. How could there possibly be a food that, no matter your nutritional needs, let's put into that family a teenager.
Who plays rugby.
Right? That teenager can eat more than the rest of the family combined. And you're going to give them an omer, just like everybody else? How does that work? So let's try and work this out. If you have a food that every single family member, every single body type, every single person in the community can eat and be satisfied, that's what lefi achloi means, that the person feels that their nutritional needs were satisfied. So if it could be one size fits all across the board, what do you call that?
Elastic.
You call that a miracle, no? Surely that's a miracle.
Well,
Now, yeah, go
I
on.
was going to say, comes from heaven, Sundays to Thursdays, tastes
Right.
like whatever you want it to
Right,
taste
good,
like.
good.
Why is it hard to believe that the portions...
Good, exactly. So let's review. We've already identified that this is a miraculous food. We've identified that it tastes like whatever you want. we've identified that it falls out of the sky. We've identified that it doesn't arrive on a Shabbos, but a double amount arrives on a Friday. We've identified that there's no waste matter. That all tells you that this is a miraculous food. So just add another miracle. What's the big deal? Once you're in the miracle business, one additional miracle is not a big chap. So just put on one more miracle that expands or contracts according to the needs of the individual despite the size of the portion. Which would be a great answer, except every single reference point in classic Jewish Torah writings, whether it's the Gemara, whether it's the Midrash, whenever they list the miraculous properties of the man, they always talk about the flavor. They always talk about the fact that it's food from heaven. So technically the bracha you would have said of it is Hamoitzi lechem min hashamayim, because it's food from heaven. They all identify the fact that there was no waste matter. In fact, that's actually said clearly in the Torah. Later, the Jews are going to complain about this and going to say this food is going to kill us because nothing ever comes out. They even identify the fact that it had all of the nutritional value that a person needed. Usually you have to have a diverse diet in order to get all the things you need. And here was just this simple mon food that was coming on a daily basis, and it had everything. They identify all those things. The one thing they never quote as a miracle of the mon is the fact that a single portion was able to satisfy all kinds of people.
One bite fits all.
One bite fits all, exactly. That indicates that this is not a miracle of the mon. So if it's not a miracle of the mon, how do you explain it? Now, we're going to make a technical distinction over here. Because obviously for us, anything that makes no sense, we just park it as a miracle. But it's more nuanced than that. See, because there are two possibilities here. There's the possibility of a miracle. So, for example, who was it? I don't remember who. One of the famous Jewish comedians used to say, for 40 years his mother served leftovers. They never found the original dish. Right? So, that's like, is that a miracle? That would be a miracle, right? But there are certain things that are not miraculous per se, even though they don't make sense to us. There are certain things that could just be the nature of a certain product. So when our sages list a whole bunch of things and say that's a miracle, that's a miracle, that's a miracle, effectively what they're identifying is that in addition to the nature of this product, it also behaves in a miraculous way. But then there's something about the product itself that, again, may not make sense to us, but that doesn't make it miraculous. Okay? So it must be that the nature of this single oimer to be able to satisfy every kind of person is not a miracle that happens to the man, rather that is the nature of the properties of the man. Can you see the difference? In other words, when I sit down and I'm having my piece of man, but to me it tastes like a tenderized steak, that is a miracle that man can do that to me. The fact that man falls out of the sky, that is a miracle. But what is man? That's a different question. What is this food? That's not what is the miraculous nature of the thing. That is what is the essence of this thing. The essence of the man is a food that can satiate any person. That's the essence of the man. So that's represented in the fact that everybody gets the same portion size, and it does the job of satisfying all kinds of people. That tells me this is the core, this is the DNA of the man. So if I truly want to understand what man is, not what man does, what man does is gives me this whole smorgasbord of whatever I want to eat. But if I want to understand what man is, this is the key to understanding what man is. A food that can satisfy any person regardless of how much you give them. So you give them a single portion and it works. Those are the properties of man. Got that? See the distinction we're making? It's nuanced, but that's the distinction between the miracles that happen with the man and the aspect of what the man is. And needless to say, in any situation, you always have to distinguish between what something is and what it does. So this is the moment, or this is the element that helps me to understand what it is. Man is unique food. It's a different nutritional system to anything that we're familiar with. What is it? It's a nutritional system that works for everybody, regardless of the quantity. Okay, so if that sounds a little bit abstract, let's step out of the world of the man for a moment. Although where we're going to go is going to be a section of the Gemara that actually talks about the man. The section in the Gemara is, I don't know, take a wild guess. Which section, which topic in Gemara do you think would get us talking about the man? I don't know, just try to think out of the box. Shabbos, right? That's where you'd expect it, because one of the big features of the man is that it doesn't fall on Shabbos, and you have to collect double on Friday. But guess what? That's not the Gemara that's talking about the man. Which Gemara is talking about the man? The Gemara about Yom Kippur. What is the link between man and Yom Kippur, other than the fact that when you're fasting, you think of all the flavors that you could taste, right? And the man could taste like all those flavors. But what's the connection point between the man and Yom Kippur? Can't seem to see one, right? Well, here's the connection. The Torah tells us that on Yom Kippur, we are required to do what on Yom Kippur? Be careful how you answer this. We are required to do what on Yom Kippur? Fast. Teshuvah. Okay? So, the Torah does not tell us to fast on Yom Kippur.
I've got the wrong book.
Interesting, right? What does the Torah tell us? It says, Ve'in nisem es nafsho seichem. You should afflict your soul on Yom Kippur. And then the sages explain that affliction means you can't eat, and you can't drink, and you can't wear leather shoes, and you can't put on any lotions or oils or deodorants or perfumes or anything like that. That all belongs to the concept of affliction, not only fasting. But of course we know that out of all of those, the main one is fasting. We know that. But the point is that the Torah calls it inui, which means affliction. If you fast forward the Torah all the way to the last book of the Torah, when Moshe is giving his big summary of the experiences they had in the desert, he says that Hashem gave you the man, vaya'achilcha, vayarivecha, vayancha, vayarivecha, vayachilcha es haman. Vayancha is the same word of inui. Hashem afflicted you, and He made you hungry, and He fed you the man. Based on that, the sages tell us that the experience of eating the man had an aspect of affliction to it. There was a discomfort associated with eating the man on two levels. There are two areas of discomfort when you ate the man. The first is, anybody ever been to one of these dining in the dark experiences? Blind tastings, right? Why not? It's a thing, like it's a kind of thing you do once if you ever do it. Because at the end of the day, one of the greatest joys of eating is the presentation of the food. So you could have the most delicious dish, but if it looks like slop, you don't have a great experience. Whereas you get something which is all plated and, what's that? The palate?
Palatable to the eye.
Palatable to the eye, exactly. The man was not. The man looked the same every single day. And anybody who's eaten institutional food, you'll know that when you have something that looks the same every single day, it eventually becomes painful. So why does it say Vayancha, that Hashem afflicted us when He gave us the man? Well, one of the points of discomfort was that the man looked the same. No matter the fact that it could taste like anything, it looked the same, and that's unpleasant. But there's a much deeper psychological pain that goes with the man, and that is, have you ever been into a Jewish fridge?
Can't get anything.
Right? Or worse, a Jewish freezer. Jewish freezers always have to be jammed to capacity. Whatever the literage is of the fridge, we use the max. Jewish pantries, a Jewish mom goes to shop for things she already has in her pantry. The man is the exact opposite. By the time you finish today's meal, there's nothing in the house. Nothing. Because there's only one portion. That portion cannot last till tomorrow. It's going to go off. That's it. That's a very uncomfortable place to be, not having anything for tomorrow. So because the man is associated with a sense of inoi, of affliction, and Yom Kippur is all about inoi around food, Fasting, the Gemara links the two. Something about the portion of man will teach you about the portion of food that you are not permitted to eat on Yom Kippur. So we're going to have to understand that link, because that'll be our first clue to how you could have one portion of food that suits everybody, in the same way as you can have one measure of food that is equal for all people in order to have transgressed Yom Kippur. So we're going to find that link.